Okay, hello everyone. So we continue with the week number 3, developing innovative idea for your company. Number 3, industry understanding.
Hello and welcome to our week on Industry Understanding and Analysis. This week, we're joining you from our Technology Advancement Program at the University of Maryland, and this is our incubator space where we work with students and faculty and professionals from the community to develop and launch their innovative ideas. A central theme that we work with companies on is developing that industry understanding and analysis, how to select the right industry, how to position themselves effectively within that, and how to be strategic in the decisions they're making on how to enter industries. With that, we thank you for joining us this week, and we look forward to talking with you about industry understanding and analysis.
Okay.
As we examine the industry and industry conditions, we're going to first look at knowledge conditions. And we're going to start by talking about industries. The definition of an industry broadly is a type of economic activity. So there's agriculture and education, there's construction and retail, there's finance and real estate, there's accommodation and food services, there's healthcare, and a variety of other industries. So when we talk about a specific industry, this is a landscape at the scale that we're talking about. So it's a big category of business or a big category of economic activity is what we mean when we talk about the term industry. So selecting the right industry is easier said than done. The success of this depends a great deal on your understanding of the industry and an industry where there's some opportunity for you. This might be an industry for which you already have some experience or expertise in. And it's important to focus on identifying an industry that is favorable to new entrants. And if it's not favorable, that's okay, but you're going to have to work a bit harder to have success within that industry. So the knowledge and demand conditions are the first two elements that we'll examine. And what we want to really understand here is the relative attractiveness of an industry based on the level of knowledge and the level of demand that industry exhibits. So for knowledge, what we mean by knowledge is the amount and the type of know-how that's needed within an industry. Industries that have specific expertise demands. Or is success based more on your financial capital, your location, or your relationships? We want high knowledge industries. Why do we want high knowledge industries for new ventures? Well, we don't want whoever has the most money to win, because somebody's always going to have more money than you. We don't want whoever has the right location to win, because then it's just a race for that location and whoever holds it is the winner. We don't want to rely solely on relationships either. Unless you happen to be the one that has the relationship, you would otherwise just be out of luck. But knowledge is something that's a bit rare. Knowledge of something is something that takes some work to develop and also some work to maintain. And knowledge-based industries are uniquely advantageous for startups. One of these is Squarespace, a company we may have mentioned before. That was a software startup out of the University of Maryland that cost very little to start if you are a computer programmer, or if you can build a team that includes some computer programmers, that you can build a website building tool, charge $8 a month, host that online, market based on revenues that you're generating, and slowly grow that to a multi-$100-million venture, which is what Anthony Castellano was able to do soon after his undergraduate experience here in College Park. So we like knowledge-based businesses that really are based on what you know, what you can learn, and what you can implement. So to leverage your knowledge, we want to explore ideas that preferably align with your education or your professional experiences. Make good use of what you know. Seek ideas that align with your know-how, that align with your interests, and that hopefully align with some of your social capital as well. What do you know is influenced by a variety of things. Consider the element of what you know now, as well as what you would like to know in the future. So choose something when you're thinking about startups that you're passionate about. Choose industries that you're interested in and that you want to spend many days and many nights working within. Look for opportunities, too, that favor unique ideas. Now, if you have a concept that is in an area that you may not have the education or the experience in today, that's okay, but make sure it's something that you really want to know and that you're willing to put in the time, perhaps months, perhaps years, of building the educational and the work experience that might be needed to really be an expert in that industry. So you're going to be playing some catch-up against others that might be in that space. We want to recognize that, and we want to be prepared to do that. So you need to expand on what you may currently know if you're looking to get into an industry that's new to you. You may also partner. You may partner via co-founders or partner via early executive hires to build out your expertise within industries that might be new to you. So that's another avenue that can be done instead of or in complement to you building that expertise yourself. So in summary, we encourage you to explore ideas that leverage your know-how, that leverage knowledge. We want to recognize that you can build that knowledge, or you can team. You can team with co-founders. You can team by bringing on executive hires that bring some complementary knowledge into the space and also may bring some social capital. They may know some individuals that you don't know within that industry that would be of great value. And that as we examine this, we want to keep at the forefront of our mind that knowledge-based conditions are uniquely valuable in the creation of new ventures.
Okay. demand condition.
As we explore the demand conditions within industries, we're going to take a look at what they mean in the context of industry conditions, and we're going to examine the influence of demand conditions on your success as an entrepreneur. Specifically, when we explore industry conditions, the first element that we discussed is knowledge conditions. The second is demand. And it's within that, by understanding both of these conditions, that you can improve your success within industries that you are entering. This, in demand conditions, will round out our discussion in the opportunity analysis canvas of the industry condition element. So when we talk about demand conditions, we're talking about a few different elements of looking at markets. We're talking about the size of the market, the rate of growth of that market, as well as the consistency of that market. We want to recognize that to create a successful venture, we need to satisfy customer needs in a better way, and we need to do it in a profitable way. And we want to recognize that a problem well stated is a problem half solved. And specifically, we want to seek ways to understand problems and to solve those known problems. We want to understand not only the current needs and wants in the market, but we also want to be able to forecast and expect where the market's moving and how we're going to be competitive not only now, but later. A big piece of that is an element of customer discovery, of actually getting out and talking to prospective customers. So as we do this, it will help us as well think ahead to when the time comes to begin talking to prospective customers. What are the various segments, and what are the various sizes, and what are the audiences that we need to be sure to consider? E-learning is a great example to think about demand conditions and the various elements that come into play. It starts in item 1 with recognizing that the global education expenditure is $4.4 trillion, that there are 1.4 billion students, 62 million educators, also a significant number of parents that are influential in purchasing decisions here as well. Now, e-learning as a subset of the education market is sizable as well at $91 billion. It also has a growth rate in the near term of 23% per year. So that average growth rate through 2017 is 91 billion, increasing at 23% per year. There are a number of other factors that play into the market opportunity and the demand conditions as well. Per element 3, 700 million individuals that lack basic literacy skills worldwide. Item 4, a rising cost of education, up 84% since 2000. High student loan debt, $1 trillion. Item 5, internet users. So if we're going to look at e-learning, we're going to both look at the learning piece in education, and we're going to look at the E piece of electronic and online. So with item 5, we look at internet users. Massive, over 2.4 billion users globally. Item 6, what is the population of the space? How many companies am I competing with? Well, if I'm in Europe, there are 3,000 alone, just in Europe. I look at item 7 of what about the hardware side? What about the ease and availability of tablets? Well, here I see that the US student tablet ownership grew over 250%. And it is rapidly growing beyond that as well. I also want to think, as I'm considering demand, about expectation and about the industry. In item 8, I see there's a lot of hype. There's a lot of expectation. There's a lot of perhaps belief that e-learning and online learning is going to be a panacea for all education, and it's going to solve all of our problems and gaps. And I want to be aware of that. I want to be aware of what these trends and desires and expectations, both hyped and fact as well. I see in item 9, there's new regulation that's emerging. And I see in item 10 that there are a number of what are considered to be hot topics of learning record stores, of MOOCs, of open education and free content. So I see when I look at e-learning and think about the demand that there are a variety of conditions to consider regarding, again, the magnitude of the market, the rate of growth, the homogeneity of it, as well as the other factors that are influencing demand. In this case, elements of affordability and web access and tablet ownership and industry standards and expectations. When I look at expenses, this is an important element to consider as well. I want to recognize what is the expenses that are incurred on education, and I see here it's over $6 billion a year in the coming years. And I see that e-learning is growing at an even faster rate. That's the 23% that we referenced. I want to know who's my customer, who's buying these elements. Well, there are 4 primary factors that are analyzed here in this IBIS report. There's a K-12 market. There's the post-secondary, typically your college market. There's corporate and government spending for employee training. And there's other there as well. That factors in a variety of other factors. But I can recognize here, via the pie graph, that 50% of the spending is done in the K-12 market. Not surprising based on that being the bulk of the population. There are many more schools and many more students in the kindergarten through 12th grade programs than there are in colleges. So in that way, I'm not necessarily surprised by this. But I'm interested in knowing the statistics and what expenses are being made such that if I'm to enter and compete in that market, what are the revenues that are up for grabs? I also want to recognize how the industry is structured and how is it segmented. Working my way from the left side, content is an area that's influenced by regulatory and curriculum matters, that's influenced by requirements, and the types of businesses that would fall in the content are the publishers, the content generators, the open source content. My next item, management systems, are looking at scale and complexity and efficiency. These are the software platforms, the tools, the smart technologies, the learning management systems, the analytics, etc., that is factored into e-learning. The third element, distribution, arguably the most popular of late, is looking at online access, free or paid, one-to-one, one-to-many. Types of businesses include immersive learning, of how can we make perhaps face-to-face learning or hybrid learning more immersive and more experiential and more customized. It's MOOCs, it's other learning portals. And all three of these elements, content management systems and distribution, will play a role as we're working to serve our customer. And we are looking at the cost of education, the level of qualification, the flexibility, the customer experience, the quality that's being delivered across the intersection of these three areas of content management systems and distribution. I'm also interested in fundraising. And specifically, as I look at these many competitors in the market, are people raising money? Are people getting funding from venture capitalists and other types of investors? And I see here that they are, albeit it's on a bit of a decline. We see it rose into 2010, but with the US and economic slowdown and the global economic slowdown, it began to dip off a bit. Not surprising, recognizing that many of the K through 12 and many of the college audiences, nominally 85% from the prior chart that we saw of our customers, are public funded, meaning they're reliant on tax revenues, meaning they're reliant on federal spending. So if federal spending is down or if tax revenues are down, then that's going to have an impact on industries that are tied and connected to them. We can, however, see that there's still significant funding in the space. $864 million in 2012 alone is the forecast here. That was a year to date. It was likely a little bit above that in the end as well. And when we look on the right-hand side of the volume of deals, we're still seeing somewhere between 87 and 130 deals done per year. So that would typically mean approximately 100 companies that have been funded via these means. We also want to look at M&A activity, the merger and acquisition activity in the space, and what was going on there as well. We're seeing that there's a lot of consolidation, a lot of acquisition. We can look here and see deal values approaching 10 billion. And we can also see that many of those deals in the education space were in fact e-learning companies. So 75% of the education companies that merged or were acquired were in the e-learning space. What we can also look at as we do this type of research is who's raising money, from who, and what target sector, and at what transaction value. What we can see here is a little bit of a survey, a little bit of a snapshot of the target. So these are the companies that raise money. We can see the investors. And we can see some pretty notable investors here that vary from some notable VCs, like Andreessen Horowitz, as well as to some foundation, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, that are putting money into this space. We can see the target sectors, largely distribution, and we can see transaction values. So a few million here, 10 or 15 million there. We can also do this type of research in other areas. Everything you've seen is from an IBIS report, and this is one of the research databases that you have access to as a University of Maryland student. There are others out there. We'll look at BIFStats, we'll look at Eurostats if we're over in the EU. We'll look at SPDC, we'll look at Census Bureau. So when we look at demand conditions, there are a variety of databases that we have access to, some free, some paid but included within your tuition, that you have access to, so we'll highlight some of these online for you as well. To capitalize on these demand conditions, we want to focus on three aspects. Again, the magnitude of the demand is important, but when you're looking at an early stage industry, when you're looking at something that is just beginning to climb its way into success, the magnitude may not necessarily be there. It may not be that high. So we're also as interested, and perhaps more interested, in the rate of growth of that demand. If it's a small market, that's okay, but if it's growing at 20 or 30 or 40% a year, we want to be on that curve as entrepreneurs. We want to ride that growth. And the idea is that a rising tide will raise many of the companies that are in that space. We're also interested in the consistency of demand across the customer segments. So when I look at that demand and I see that half of the market spend is K through 12, that's a fairly homogeneous market. There probably is a similar set of needs and wants across that broad segment. Now that doesn't mean that I necessarily want to try and build a product that's going to serve everyone. The needs of a kindergarten class and the needs of a high school class are very different. The sophistication of the students is very different. What a 6-year-old and an 18-year-old can do or expect is very different. So it's not necessarily to say that it's all the same and it's a one-size-fits-all, but at least it brings me into a common genre of what some of the needs and wants are. There's likely some kind of a grading system that's employed. There's likely some measure of assignments and homeworks and deliverables that's employed. There's some kind of a teacher-student relationship. There's some kind of a parent or guardian relationship. There are the administrators at the K through 12 area that will play a role, and there may be various other regulations regarding student privacy, of grade privacy, that we want to consider as well. Now it's a different set of factors and concerns if we're looking at corporate training, or we're looking at the training of employees within the government, by the government. So that's what we mean by consistency of demand. Are there pockets of demand where there's a large grouping of K through 12, a large grouping of the post-secondary, a large grouping of corporate and government, where if we were to develop a solution, we could tackle one of those large areas with our solution and not have to build an entirely new solution if we wanted to compete within that area. Now this all brings the question of, once you've recognized an industry and began to dissect the demand, what do you do from there? For me, I like to think about, well, where is there an unrealized opportunity? If everyone that I'm seeing, particularly those that are raising venture capital and raising a lot of venture capital from good companies, are in the distribution column, I, as a startup, may not want to compete there. I might not want to chase what everyone else is chasing. I might want to look at something different. I might want to look to the management system side. My rationale could be that on distribution, there are a lot of players and a lot of funding going into that. On the content side, perhaps I could be a content generator, but my expectancy is that the colleges and the schools may already have the content, or may have the expertise to develop that content, or even the responsibility, philosophically, to develop their content. So I might want to rest in the center. I might want to rest as a startup in management systems and look at tools that can be of value. And maybe I don't want to only look at tools and all tools, maybe I want to look at mobile tools. And I might not just want to look at mobile tools, I might want to look at doing analytics within mobile, within management systems. So that's the kind of research that you can do to drive where you might want to compete and think about where the opportunity is and where is there sufficient magnitude and rate of growth and homogeneity that you can build a sustainable startup. So I'm seeking sizable markets that are growing, that have some similar needs and wants, that I can deliver something of value and focus my resources and do that effectively. And I can do it in an area that perhaps there's a niche that for me is attractive. If it's a $1 million or a $5 million opportunity for me, that would be very attractive. For Microsoft, for Google, not answering the phone for $1 million opportunity, not having a meeting to discuss a $1 million opportunity, just too small for companies at that scale. So you may find that there are opportunities to engage and participate in market opportunities that might be too small for some of the large players to compete in, but may be very much worth it as a startup. Segmentation is a central piece to consider as well when you're thinking about demand. With segmentation, it's an opportunity to specialize and to build reputation and a brand for doing one thing well, that you can leverage that into new things later, but it gives you discipline, and it lets you go in and think about how do I fill a need. In summary, when we think about demand conditions, we want to recognize this is a piece of the industry that we need to understand, and we want to recognize the element and the influence that magnetism, rate of growth, and homogeneity plays as we look to bring new products to market.
Industry circle.
The life cycle of your candidate industry is important to understand as well. And when we look at life cycle, we're going to look at it in the context of industry status and its impact on your success as an entrepreneur. When we explore the industry, we've talked about industry conditions and specifically the knowledge and demand factors. Now we're going to transition into industry status and think about the influence of life cycle and structure. This gives us some insights into the rules of that industry as well as some of the hurdles that we may face. And within the opportunity analysis canvas, this will introduce our discussion of the fifth element of industry status. So life cycle. It's similar to what you would expect. It's the stage of development of an industry. And the life cycle is going to influence your success because it impacts how existing and new competitors are going to behave and react to your entry. It comes in several categories. In this example, it starts with research and development. You may have a limited monopoly if you're an early entrant. The second phase is growth. You begin to launch your product in the market, and other competitors enter the market as well. The third stage is maturity. You have essentially reached a peak of competition, and you yourself may face somewhat lower production and somewhat lower revenues than you may have when you were in that growth phase. And then lastly is decline, whereas there are simply too many options for the market. There are too many competitors for all to survive, and you see some winding down of that opportunity. Now, other elements, when you look at life cycle, may break them into young, middle-aged, and old as well. The curve is very similar, and we want to, as startups, recognize there's tremendous value to being towards the front of that curve. It's not to say that if you're not the first entrant that there's no opportunity, but I would argue if there are 10 or 20 or 30 other companies already in space that may be trying to do the same thing you're trying to do, and particularly if they're trying to achieve it the same way, that might not be the product opportunity that I would at least pursue. So let's look at this. You're familiar with Hollywood. You may be familiar with Bollywood. You may or may not be familiar with Nollywood. So we're going to take a look at this. And the element to take away here is to realize that as industries are birthed, mature, and decline, there may be an opportunity for that industry to reemerge in other geographic regions. That's the case that we're going to talk about here. So one of our key takeaways here is that the life cycle influences the cost of entry and the rules of competition within an industry. And depending on the maturity, if you're early, it can be very affordable. It can be relatively easy from a financial standpoint, and much more cost-effective for entrepreneurs to enter and compete successfully if they are early entrants into an industry. Inversely, if it's a middle or late-stage industry, they may already be dominated by large and established competitors. They may have economies of scale already established. They may have a brand and partnerships and distribution already built. And it can be very expensive, very complicated, and potentially not very profitable to be a startup in that environment. So we want to favor being an early entrant and participating in the benefits of being at the front of that life cycle. What that means in context, when you look at a few of the metrics for Nollywood, is the estimated annual revenues of the Nigerian film industry is $590 million. There are further investment mechanisms and loan mechanisms funded by the government to try and increase and grow that. We see that there are 50 films produced in Nigeria weekly, and the average cost of them are somewhere between $25,000 and $70,000. In contrast, a top Hollywood film, $250 million. An average Hollywood film, maybe something in the order of $50 million. So you're still comparing thousands to millions when you are looking at the relative cost of entry and operation within these different areas. And the opportunity to distribute online may bring a very attractive audience as well. So the production in a country by no means limits its market and the customer base to that country. I want to take a different look at another firm that I'm very familiar with, a company called FiscalNote. So FiscalNote is using a proprietary database that they've developed of legislation and advanced predictive analytics to sell to companies and organizations to search, discover, and forecast state and federal legislation. This lets them monitor trends in different industries or states that those companies or organizations are interested in, and it leverages machine learning algorithms that FiscalNote has developed to discover new developments relevant to your company or organization, as well as to anticipate what may come and what it means to you. So when you think about the life cycle, one way to consider it is how many companies are out there doing the same thing. How many companies are out there that are using some measure of big data and machine learning and analytics to examine state and federal legislation? For me, the answer was not many, arguably none, the way that they're doing it. So they're very much on the front end of this market. What that lets them do, being on the very front, is to build a strong team. So beyond the three co-founders, including Jonathan Chen, the CTO, that I work most closely here as a student at the University of Maryland, they were able to build a very strong advisory team. An advisory team from some companies that you may know, like Elsevier and LegalZoom. An advisory team of federal expertise, people that had worked in the White House, people that had worked at the State Department, people that understood the market that they were pursuing and had the relationships to help facilitate that. They also were able to secure some notable investors. Mark Cuban, Jerry Yang, one of the co-founders of Yahoo, as well as venture capital. So as students, as full-time students in the fall of their senior year, they were able to raise $1.2 million in venture funding from NEA and first round capital. So in that way, by being new, by being at the very front of that industry life cycle, they were able to attract and bring in talent and funding that had they been the 10th company or the 20th company to do it 2 or 3 years from now, they probably would not have been able to get the advisors nor get the funding that they've been able to access as an early entrant. So what we see there is that new ventures perform best in young industries. There's substantially less competition by definition. And the competition is often small, thereby giving a more level playing field to new entrants. It also gives you somewhat of a common learning curve. When everyone is new, there are no old competitors. There are no established leaders. There aren't decades of experience. There isn't partnerships and exclusivity agreements that are already in play. There aren't distribution channels that are already locked up. It's somewhat of an open playing field that you can compete with and compete on somewhat equal footing. So in summary, when we think about life cycle, it influences the competitive environment of the venture and your overall success substantially. Young industries present multiple advantages for new entrants. And while it's not known, while you do have to give significant consideration to what may happen, how to establish, there's not a lot of precedent for what will work. I would argue that while that is a challenge, there's still more ultimate upside to enter and participate in the young industry, in industries that are very early in those life cycles.
Okay. You will do this later. Thank you.